Every man dies, Ida the wolf answered. It's just about when, and how. Dash. Burn. Burn the highest tower. She smuggled barks and twigs and hay, filling her pockets with dry leaves and moss. Burn the highest tower when the wolf died. She was out of breath after 3 times going up and down the tower, scattering enough tinder to light the fire. The windows were long broken, the woods already decaying on the wooden floor. Lord Eldrick once said that he wanted to remodel the tower, but somehow never did. The 4th time she climbed into the tower, she had to drop the twigs from her arms at the top of the stairs, short of breath. Her legs ached. She had left the Wolf King's chamber as they prepared to pull the arrowhead. Men around the castle were busy moving the wounded to the back of the castle, others were muttering about their dying king. Burn the highest tower when the wolf died. She huffed as she picked up the fallen twigs and pushed the door open. For the 2nd time, the twigs fell from her arms. Lord Bolton and 3 men-at-arms stood inside. "Hello, Ida," he said, a glint of amusement emanated from those weird eyes. "You've been busy." In no time the 3 men surrounded her, one of whom pushed her to the floor. She fell and hit the branches and barks scattered on the floor, hearing the rustle of their chainmails and boots. "Do you want to tell me what you have been doing?" She was too scared to speak a word. "I told my men to keep an eye on you and your friends. They said you've been busy, child. Running. Disappearing." Whispering, his tone dropped a little and her heart was beating so loud she almost couldn't hear what Lord Bolton was saying. "Now, do you want to tell me about it?" His face unreadable as he squatted in front of her. "No." At close range, Lord Bolton's fair smooth face was almost solemn. He has an odd aura about him, the stillness of bated breath, the distant but lingering gaze. When he took her hand in his, she could feel the smoothness of his palm. "Do you know what is the word of my house?" "No, Lord. Our blades are sharp." Before she could say a word, he slammed her hand to the floor and with renowned strength held it in place. 2 men came behind her, shoving her face down on the wooden floor. One held her other hand, while the other gripped her shoulders so hard it made her unable to move. She felt a weight was placed on her back to keep her laying still on her stomach. And indeed, the blade Lord Bolton took out from his cloak was sharp. Shaped like no other blades she had ever seen, it pricked on her skin like cold water in the morning as he calmly slashed the back of her hand. It was a shallow cut to open the skin. "Tell me, Ida, where did you go this evening?" She fought the tears dwelling in her eyes. "Nowhere, Lord, just in the kitchen." Through the wound he moved the blades inward, but not deep enough, only to the area between her skin and her muscle. The world became hazy as she heard herself screamed. The pain was unspeakable, the grip on her shoulders and her hands grew tighter as she fought the pain. "Skinning requires an even hand." Lord Bolton's soft voice cuts through her screaming, explaining to her patiently as if they were flaying a deer. "One has to make careful cuts to avoid damaging the skin. If you ever peel an apple, that is the best way to do it. I will ask you again. Where did you go, Ida?" "The hill." "The hill on the east side of the castle. How did you do that?" When she refused to answer, the blade began to move, slowly, just underneath her skin like Lord Bolton had explained. Pain washed over her 3 times fold when the blade forcefully separated the flesh from the skin, scorching like fire. She screamed and cried and begged, only for Lord Bolton to ask the question all over again in his odd calmness. "From the sewer in the bathhouse. Please. Please." The blade stopped moving and she shivered violently, crying and wetting her clothes. "Whom did you meet?" She was so afraid he would move the blade again. The back of her hand that Lord Bolton skinned was bathed in blood. She felt close to losing consciousness due to the pain. "Tell me, whom did you meet?" She couldn't stop crying and shaking. "What did they tell you?" To burn the highest tower, when the wolf died." Lord Bolton was silent, digesting the information she had just relayed. He took a few strands of hay from her pocket, those weird eyes of his combing through the room filled with dry twigs and tinder. Slowly, he rose and walked to the ledge of a broken window to peek at a host waiting outside the castle. His voice was still calm when he spoke. "Is there any other way out of the castle?" "Just the bathhouse." She was not lying this time. "A man was sent to check. When he got back, the sewerage was too small to be passed by an adult. Lord Bolton wiped his blade from the blood, chuckling slightly at her. Clever. Cut off the serpent's head, then the body dies. Your lord thinks we will be easily destroyed just then, he said. She curled up on the wooden floor, wet with tears, blood, and her piss, hugging her hand to her chest. The skin Lord Bolton had flayed was dangling painfully from the flesh. What do we do now, my lord? Rouse and prepare the men to fight. Tell the king and other lords to be ready. As soon as smoke rises into the sky, the gates will be opened. Cavalry in the vanguard to lead the charge. The man ran to do what he was bid. There are too many of them, my lord, another man spoke. I know, Locke, but we have the advantage. When they think they'll face a broken enemy ready to surrender, instead when the gates are opened they'll get northern hospitality. One thing I agreed with the young wolf is to strike while the iron is hot. While the southern lords cowered, but not the north. She rolled from where she sat, hitting the floor with a thud. Lord Bolton looked at her as if he just remembered she was still there. End her suffering. A blade was drawn and the sharpened edge sank into her belly, followed by something spurting out when the man pulled the blade from her. She could no longer scream. Well, death is not so bad, she thought, lying in the pool of her urine and blood. We're ready, Lord Bolton. Good. Do as the orphan said, she heard Lord Bolton said. Burn the tower. Fire quickly grabbed the hay scattered around the tower. Moss and wood from a broken window ledge easily igniting the fire into a bigger flame, sending black smoke to her nostrils. She tried to cough, but choked on her own saliva and blood. She couldn't breathe. Her body was warm and wet, heavy, the heart accelerated. Locke, find the rest of the orphans. Don't make a mess nor a noise. B. Little Tim, she tried to call her friends, but no sound came out. She coughed again, inhaling smoke and dust. Flames spread to the roof, raining her with embers. The thick, black smoke made it hard to stay awake. She thought about the spider's soft hands when he handed her the sweets, of the juicy peach he let her tasted. She will miss him. Notes. Not everyone will like the way I wrote battle scenes / strategies, and that's okay. I'm not GRM and I'm most definite not Miguel Sapochnik or Peter Jackson. English is not my native, and I apologize in advance for any misspelling or grammatical errors. I'm back to full-time job now, and between other obligations I'm afraid updates will take longer than before. I've written up until the epilogue though sporadically, and when the muse hits, still need to fill holes here and there. Please know that I truly appreciate your readership. Your kind kudos and comments are always welcome. Cannot thank you enough for being so supportive since I start writing this fic for my therapy. Also, I've taken you nearly half of the fic. Please heed tags and archive warnings and author's disclaimer in chat 1, which I'm sure you all did, but I want to make sure I'm not breaking hearts here, as when I started a fic I already knew which directions I'm going to take. Thank you so much and 7 blessings. X. Chapter 22. Chapter text. BRINNE. A flock of crows was screaming from a dead tree, puffing their dark wings while watching her with interest. Dead meat walking, Brian guessed. Meat, meat, meat. Night was falling when she continued forward. The horse appeared calm despite the noisy crowing. As a sign of gratitude, Brian stroked its mane fondly. Nearing the edge of the woods, she stepped down from the horse to continue on foot. We've got only one chance to make the biggest fire the Westerlands has ever seen. Galbart's voice haunts her as she advances silently, stealthily, into a clearing. They had taken all the remaining oil and combustible material, dividing it between 15 people. Each of them moved to form a crescent perimeter behind the host besieging Sarsfield, spilling oil and spreading twigs and tinder. The rustling leaves make her stay alert, the crowing crows camouflage any sound she might make. When she stood petrified, every sense in her body was scanning the surroundings for any movements. Thankfully, there was none. She could hear the faint commotion from the besieging camp. The smell of stew and cheese made her stomach rumble. The crows were watching her intently. Let us hope our friends see what is happening and come out to fight, Galbart said. Let us hope they are not dead, yet. Finishing her task with the tinder, Brian crept back to where she left her horse. She was among the last ones who got back to where Galbart was waiting, reporting that fire is good to go. Galbart nodded. A brief of silence Brian recognized as the moment where men were praying to their gods before an impending battle. They took positions behind the kindling. There were only two banners in the camp in front of them, a roaring golden lion and a blasting arrow over a green field. Lannisters and Sarsfield. Prepare to take her to Riverrun, Brian told Walton and Pier. She had spare a dozen men mounted on horses to do the bidding. Don't wait until the battle is lost. Yes, milady, Pier nodded. Walton grinds his jaw, a gesture of displeasure, but nodded all the same. Brian's eyes fell to Rob's direwolf. The beast growled softly, looking at the castle, its front legs scratching the ground impatiently. He wants to go to his master, Brian thought. Look. A man pointed to the castle's highest tower. From all the way across the distance, firelights like bonfires casting yellow and orange glow to the dark sky. What in seven hells? Clifford Swan cursed. They could hear the roar and massive cheer from their opponent's camp. Grey Wind bared its teeth to hear the noise. Is something happening? We must stay calm, my lords, Brian advised, though she was at loss upon seeing the fire. In front of them the men woke to take swords and shields as if preparing to storm the castle. Men saddling their horses, squires running to hand swords and shields. They are preparing to fight, Galbart said, incredulous. Did they hear us? No, my lord, Brian said, for that she was sure. Something else is happening. Grey Wind started to growl, the fur bristling. For a moment she pondered what to do to the direwolf. It only obeyed Rob. There seemed to be a strong bond between the king in the north and his direwolf. Sometimes Brian sensed they were communicating. She was in doubt now. Should she tell Grey Wind to go with them to free Sarsfield? Or should she let the direwolf follow Myrcella to Riverrun? Does the direwolf understand if Brian speaks to it? Grey, she called, hesitating. The direwolf's golden eyes found hers and she was struck at how intelligently it stared back at her. Before she could say a word, Grey Wind stood straight and howled. The direwolf will give away our position. Galbart hissed. No. Brian turned to the older man, it signaled to attack. Light the fire. You hear the lady? Galbart bellowed to his squire, who hurried off to the kindling with a flint. Before any spark could be produced, Grey Wind leaped and disappeared into the dark. Where is it going? Benfred asked. To your king, Brian answered. She turned to Myrcella. You must go now. I will not go to Riverrun, Myrcella said stubbornly. I will wait for the aftermath here. Whatever happens. No time for Brian to argue. Soon the flame swooped down the entire kindling. Even before the flames cut through the darkness of the night, Brian had heard panicked cries from their opponent's camp. The sound of horses kicking the ground in fear, the screams of trampled men, accompanied by Grey Wind's chilling howls. The line that began to form in front of them was now shattered before it could double its strength. The wolf is here. The fire spread as fast as lightning, burning all the twigs and dry leaves. Oil accelerated the already angry flames, making it soar into the dark sky. Shouts were heard louder from the camp. A balding man in his rune armor rode beside them, his squire blew a horn. The sky blue falcon fluttered side by side with other sigils in the dark sky. Knights of the Vale, he roared. Hundreds of mounted men behind him cheered. For more than 1,000 years the Vale has sworn allegiance to Hauser. The Iron Throne has erased its rightful warden of the East, sacrificing us to defend the murderer of your liege lord. No withdrawal, no time for cowardice. Us Knights of the Vale know none of it. Each of you swore allegiance to your liege lord, and when you rode west with me. Your enemy is before you now. Forward. His men raise the swords in their hands into the air as they charge. Let's go get our king, said Galbart, turning to Brian and grinned. Their horses were driven at full force through the fire fence and broke into the enemy's camp. Brian ran her sword left and right, trampling men on her way to the castle. The enemy line had moved towards the castle gates, the ones in the rear turned only to see Brian's sword coming down at them. The enemy front had reached the castle, when the gates were swung open from the inside. Another horn was blown, a cavalry rode out bearing two banners at the front, a grey direwolf and a crowned black stag surrounded by fiery flames. Great Yonumber rode his stallion like a madman, leading the northern cavalry. He ran over anyone in his path without mercy, the tip of his ugly sword red with blood. The enemy's forces began to fall apart due to incoming assault from two directions. Their generals were shouting from their horses, but arrows silenced them forever. No one could trace Grey Wind's movements. The direwolf was too fast for naked eyes to see, and before the enemy knew it, Grey Wind attacked from their blind spots, sending their mounts into frenzy. Some of them, the green ones, were trying to run away into the woods, but fire forbade them to escape fate. If it was not fire that roasted them in their armors, it was the men Brian and Galbart left to wait by the edge of the woods that finished the job. Her horse trampled the scattered tents, the sword in her hand as red as great Yonumbers. Her horse ran up to a man screaming upon seeing the Stark banner riding out from the castle. "But he's supposed to be dead," was his last words before Brian's sword descended to his head, separating it from the shoulder. His widened eyes stare at her blankly in his death. A shadow of grey leaped beside her horse to run towards the castle. Even in the dark she could not possibly not recognize the man sitting on his black destrier. Grey Wind welcomed his master. Once the beast was by his master's side and howling into the night sky, the hair on Brian's neck stood. On Rob's right was Brynden Tully, and on his left was Lord Bolton. "Don't let anyone escape," Brian heard the young wolf ordered his lieutenants. "They are going to kill us. Put them all to swords, even the lords and noble births. We take no prisoners. But leave the green ones, they are to be sent to the wall." A faint smile came upon Roose Bolton's face as riders after riders kept coming out from inside the castle. The cold wind carries the smell of blood. By the time the morning sun began to illuminate their battlefield, bodies of the dead scattered for the crows to feast, hundreds of tents flattened to the ground. Survivors were rounded near the bank of a river by the hill, battered and shaking. Most of them were young enough to be called boys and not grown men. Lord Bolton was last seen riding towards their prisoners, and Brian could only guess what would happen to them. She had heard of his plan to give them a Bolton reminder before sending them to the wall before the sun is high. She turned the rein to trot back to Rob, letting the Lord of Dreadfort do his part. When she came to the young wolf, Grey Wind was still by his side. Rob seated on his horse, his breath wheezing and the face pale as a mare's milk. He wore his usual surcoat atop the armor, huddling beneath the fur. The balding man and his host were standing with their backs on her, but she heard their conversation as she came near. "Regards from Lysa Arryn, the Lady Warden of the East. Her envoy is most welcome, my lord," came Rob's answer, and Brian noted the weak voice he muttered instead of his usual warm and confident accent. "How many of you, my lord?" Great Jon asked, narrowing his eyes to the host before him. 1,000 mounted knights, Roibar Royce answered. "Lady Arryn wants to convey this letter to you, your grace." A sealed letter was pulled out from his hip, the same letter bearing Arryn's falcon and crescent moon seal that Lord Royce showed to them in the woods. Blackfish took the letter. Rob's eyes found Brian and he called her to come closer. "Lord Glover said we lost our camp," Rob said. "Yes, your grace." "Where is she?" Brian knew who he meant. "In the woods." "Fetch her, if you please, Lady Brian. Bring her to me at once." The fur was bristled but not by the wind. The young wolf was shaking beneath it. His breath came in ragged and shallow gasps. Brian had seen enough death to know that the young wolf had suffered a pretty bad injury, and it was not from this battle. She did not see him riding to meet the enemy like his usual manner. "Right away, your grace," she answered, bowing her head. As she turned her horse around, she heard Blackfish urging Rob to get back into the castle. Bodies were thrown into the fire that still aflame in the edge of the woods. Crows flying low, crowing as they flapped their wings noisily. The sound of cries was heard from the river, but a shallow hill covered whomever was there from sight. She heard the heart-wrenching begs and the screaming. Each and every one of those will gladly be taken to the wall after the ordeal has finished. More broken men to fight and die against the wildlings. By the time they entered the castle, the fire in the highest tower was almost extinguished, leaving a black tower soaring into the sky. "Lady Brian." Great Yonumber greeted her at the yard. They exchanged a brief handshake, rattling their gauntlets in a comfortable clank. "My lord. I am glad you are unscathed. And you, my lady. I think the gods are on our side. What a time to show the power of the north to those southerners." Then he remembered where she came from, before quickly adding, "I mean, those Sarsfields and Lannisters. Great Yon's eyes wandered to Myrcella behind her and she saw how his face wrinkled in annoyance. The king asked for her, Brian told him. Great Yon scoffed, but gestured to them to follow him nonetheless. She was tempted to ask the casualties they suffered, and to relay information of the camp as soon as she could, but knew it had to wait. What happened, Lady Brian? Myrcella whispered. The king is not in a good shape, she answered. What do you mean, not in a good shape? You'll see soon enough. They walk side by side along the hallway, passing men scattered about. The Knights of the Vale were flocking by the Barbican walls, taking sentries. Brian found Blackfish in the Great Hall, who joined them towards the Lord's chamber. Really stubborn, eh, Lady Brian? Blackfish casually opened the conversation as they walked. Once he knew they'd attack when he died, he insisted on appearing in front of his men and led the assault. Even when he was hit, Great Yon told me he wouldn't leave the battlefield before ensuring that his men were safe. Without his courage, we might have been divided. Brian glanced at Myrcella. What happened, my lord? If you will kindly tell me, the girl asked, clearly confused. Blackfish stopped on his track to look at the princess. He sighed. The king was hit. An arrow to his pectoral, princess. We're going to pull the arrowhead when Lord Bolton found out about the incoming attack. When the king heard it, he decided to fight on, postponing the treatment. Seeing Myrcella's face, he continued, and no, princess, no Maester here. I didn't see any healers among your group, and those from the Vale too. They died in the attack and burning of our camp, my lord, Brian said. They resumed walking until reaching the furthest end of the hallway. Half a dozen men-at-arms stood guard by the door, nodding at Blackfish and Great Yon before holding the door open. They were all northern men, Brian noticed. Robb trusted his southern lords, but northerners looked after each other. When the four of them entered the chamber, Brian could see the young wolf had already moved to the bed. Gone were all the ferocity and strength that usually enveloped him. You asked for Princess Myrcella Baratheon, your grace? Blackfish asked. Robb turned and his eyes found Myrcella. He nodded. The girl knelt beside his bed. Brian could not see her face nor hear what she murmured to him, but it must have been shock, or fear, because she heard the young wolf say, "It's all right. It's all right. He's getting weaker, I'm not sure if he could." Blackfish didn't finish his sentence. He rubbed his weary face. It has been some time since he was hit. Can you not save him? The princess turned to look over her shoulder. We're afraid the arrowhead is like this. Blackfish took out something from his pocket. He showed her a metal arrowhead extracted from the leg of one of his men. It was shaped like a fish hook, curved backwards on each side. Carefully he put it on Myrcella's palm, letting the girl observe it. I've seen my men get their flesh torn out as the arrowhead was pulled. They never walk the same again. Those who got hit in their midsection didn't survive even when he cauterized the wound. We're not sure if it hit an organ, breaking his bone, or else. There's also no milk of the poppy, he said grimly. And we cannot just push it through him, not when the arrow stuck there, Great Yon added. So you let him die? Myrcella looked at the two men with wide glassy eyes, judging. Can you not do something? Anything. My great-uncle will take you back to your kin, said Robb. Everything is set. You'll be safe. You have my word, and I keep it. No, she replied, distraught, but Robb already turned and closed his eyes. Take her please, uncle. The princess was crying when Blackfish ushered her from the chamber. Brian glanced to the bed and saw the young wolf looks just as sad. But of his impending death, or something else, Brian could not fathom. In the afternoon they were assembled in the Lord's Solar again, a spacious chamber now packed with heavily armored men. So crowded that Brian could not see Robb Stark lying on the bed. His lieutenants reported the aftermath of the battle. Crows were busy flying around the castle to feast on the dead, the bodies they have not buried. One way in and one way out, this castle is a perfect place to trap an army. Lord Bolton mumbled, scratching his beardless chin. Food is scarce. We're left to eat the wounded horses, ones that couldn't run anymore. We're so close to Casterly Rock now to turn back. Brian sat idly on her chair, listening to the lords talking. She has not slept in 2 days and now fatigue almost claimed her. Sitting was not a wise option, so she stood next to Benfred near the hearth. Where's Ida? Are the children safe? Robb Stark's voice was heard from the bed. Weaker and softer. Who, Your Grace? Lord Bolton raised an eyebrow. Oh. The orphans. We've not seen them, Your Grace. Must have slipped out when we opened the gates. With such commotion no one paid attention to those orphans, Sir Donald scoffed. Orphans cannot be trusted. When this war is over, there will be many of them. Are you going to send them away? Treating them with suspicion. Robb rebuked him. Brian glanced at the Blackfish just as he lowered his gaze to intently look at his boots. Something he said earlier poked her interest. How did Roose Bolton know the enemy is going to attack when the young wolf is dead? Did you burn that tower, Lord Bolton? Brian suddenly remembered the scorched tower. Roose Bolton examined her like he was seeing her the first time. Yes, he said, emotionless. May I ask why, my lord? Is that important? Gratian chimed in, we destroyed them. We won. For now, Blackfish reminded him. Still a long way to go, if you ask me. Tywin Lannister sacrificed Sarsfield. He let Robb take an empty castle, void of supplies. He had slyly learned Robb's ploy in the Fork and Whispering Woods, but instead of dividing his forces into two, Tywin must have divided them into three. The first group was the one who faced them in battle, led by Tywin's younger brother Kevan Lannister. The second group, which consisted of his sellswords, seemed to circle the Westerlands through Hornval to ambush Robb's camp. Yet those 50 men carried out their mission effectively, burning down every supply to the last grain and livestock. The third and last group, with most of his men, was still nowhere to be seen. Tell me about the camp, Lady Brian, Robb called. She told them about the sellswords, the casualties, and who survived the sack. There were not many. As Sir Patrick's name was brought up, Roybar Royce of the Vale spoke up for the first time. How unfortunate. He has just become the Lord of Seaguard. My lord. Brian turned to face the older man. The morning we left the Vale, ravens came to announce about his father's death. Sir Patrick is Lord Jason's only heir, I heard. He could have survived the fall of Free. That Brian did not know his name, said. Did you say that nobody was found? Yes. Brian confirmed. So many deaths, so many to lose. If he survives, they must have taken him. Sir Patrick will be a valuable hostage, now that he is the Lord of Seaguard. The crown must know it. But Tywin sent sellswords, didn't he? Robb mentioned. You must rest now, Blackfish reminded his great-nephew. Robb Stark did not say another word, too drowned in his sorrow. They left his solar, and while standing in the hallway she saw Walton came to her, huffing. Pardon, my lady, my lords. Walton inclined his head. The girl asked to audience with you, Lady Brian. All eyes fell on her. Why? Asked Gratian. It's about the king, my lord, but I beg your pardon, she didn't say anything much. Thank you, Walton, I'll be there in a moment. When she came to her chamber, Myrcella was sitting in front of the hearth, intently looking at the arrowhead in her hand. Before Brian could muster a greeting, Myrcella rose from her chair. Lady Brian, forgive me, but I've an idea, the girl said. I've been thinking about this arrowhead. She raised the arrowhead before the hearth. Brian could see the sharp glint from the barbed edge. What about it, princess? I think I found a way to safely extract it. Brian raised a skeptical brow. You think? I read something in Maester Vimon's scrolls, when I helped him make new copies of old manuscripts in Riverrun. And did it involve how to treat such a wound? Myrcella bit her bottom lip, not quite. Why should I trust you? A fair question. Myrcella Baratheon was no healer, let alone a maester. She was raised a privileged princess, kept inside a palace her whole life. What if this is some kind of trickery? Brian doubted it. Myrcella was alone, and more than one lord would be happy to run his sword across her neck if it does. And Brian knew that look. She used to give her father the same look. I am going to do this, whether you're willing or not. Please, Myrcella said, a whimper almost inaudibly, but Brian heard it just fine. The other lords won't be so pleased, Brian warned. I know, my lady. Myrcella looked her in the eye and Brian remembered thinking of how green her eyes were, shining of determination. But I cannot let him die. I have to try. You know I have to. If you fail, the lords could blame you for his death. I know. Is it the risk you're willing to take? Brian asked, marveling in Myrcella's stubbornness. She did not need to hear Myrcella's answer, nor see her nod to know. The girl had made up her mind. When you want to help someone, you'll try everything to save them. Whatever it takes. As long as you can save him, at least you tried. I want to do the same to him, just like you did for my uncle. I failed Renly, she thought. Robb Stark is not your king. You'll do the same if it was my uncle. He was the youngest Baratheon after Stannis. Yet you came to him when he wanted the Iron Throne, not Stannis. Pia dipped her head to avoid looking at Brian. A heartbeat passed, neither of them said a word. Fine, Brian said softly, breaking the silence. I'll take you to him. Chapter 23. Chapter text. Myrcella. He lay on the bed, clothless, save for a simple cotton breeches. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks as she tried her best not to stare. It was a hard thing to do. Deep in her heart she longed for Maester Vimon's guidance, of his gentle voice giving her instructions and advice. However, Robb had no one to tend to his wound, as no Maester and healers were among them anymore. Her hand trembled as she touched his skin, it was cold and sweaty. They had broken the shaft of the arrow, leaving only a few inches from the surface of the wound. Can you do it? Great Jon Umber's dry voice startled her, and she dropped the arrowhead in her other hand. The huge man sighed, visibly annoyed, and perhaps thinking of how clumsy she was. Yes, she replied, hoping to summon some courage to her voice. If you make him worse. She won't, my lord. Brian shut him up. I am not leaving the king. Great Jon scowled. You're welcome to watch, my lord, but only if you help. Please fetch the bowl. What did you just say? The man snarled. Robb laughed weakly from the bed. I believe she just asked you to help fetch the bowl, Lord Umber. Great Jon Umber looked like he wanted to run his sword through her neck, but he did not say a thing. He, unexpectedly, turned to fetch the said bowl. Myrcella thought he'd slam it on the nightstand, but to her surprise, he put in gently as to avoid spilling the water inside. Myrcella washed her hands in the clean water. Now how will you do it? He demanded. I once observed Maester Vimon retracting a nail from a carpenter's foot. I know it was different, but, she peered closer at the wound, carefully touching the shaft. First, I need to know if the arrowhead impacted your bone. I've to twist the shaft a bit. It was what the Maester did. Do what you think must be done, Robb said. I'm scared. I've never done this before, and you'll be in so much pain, Your Grace. He forced a grin. It seems that you and I have no other choice. Myrcella bit her lower lip, feeling the dread crept in her spine. She put a sweaty palm on the shaft and twisted it at its tip. Robb groaned. Well? Great Jon asked, clearly impatient. By the feel of it, she did not think the head pierced into his bones, which was a fortunate thing. I think the arrow didn't hit the bone. It might have stuck in the muscle beneath. Upon seeing the arrowhead, she knew Lord Umber was right. They couldn't just push the arrow through nor pull it backwards. It has to be extracted with careful calculation to prevent the barbed ends tearing more of Robb's flesh. Fortunately, the arrow tended to be superficial. It did not puncture into Robb's vital organ nor bones, so he'd have a better chance to survive the wound. That, if they could prevent it from becoming infected. I need to make an incision on these sides, to open the way for us to pull the arrowhead out safely, she said, for the 100th time hoping for Maester Vimon's guidance, but the kind Maester was hundreds leagues away from them. I read that was what Maesters would do. The surface of the skin must be open to remove debris or splinters. I think it can be done to remove this kind of arrowhead too. Brilliant, said Blackfish, clearly receiving her idea well. Bloody hells, Robb breathed out, but nodded his consent. Do it. Don't let the head separate from the shaft, Blackfish reminded her. We need something to pull it at once, after she made the incision. A pincer, Great Jon said. There's a forge and carpentry near the kitchen. I'll find something to help us pull the arrowhead, Brian offered. She was gone before Myrcella said a thing, and when Brian came back a moment later, she brought a carpenter's pincer. They soaked the tool in boiling water to sterilize it, along with Rob's blade. "Your Grace, this will hurt," she warned. "I'll bear the pain," said Rob, a bit daunted but determined. "Just get this thing out of me. And it will leave you a scar. It'd be a badge of honor." Gratian moved to help hold Rob back from the bed, while Blackfish gave Rob a piece of wood to bite down. She took out Rob's dagger from the boiling water, wiping it dry with a piece of clean cloth. It was sharp enough to make the needed incisions. His eyes looked determined, flinching as the hot blade touched his skin. "I'm scared," she wanted to scream. "I cannot do this. What if I make him worse? What if I was wrong?" "Princess?" Brian asked from behind her back, sensing her sudden doubt. "Try, or he'll die." Rob was shaking violently as she made the first cut. She had to cut him up without the milk of the poppy. Her hand shook a little, but she tried with all she might to keep it steady even when she was scared, making an incision of 1/2 inch. The entry wound was already bruised and depressed. Once she made the first incision, blood spurted out, darker than she has normally seen in Maester Vimon's infirmary. Rob was shaking, his knuckles turned white as he gripped the bedding. His body trembled, writhing, but was easily held still by Gratian. "One more," she said, clenching the hilt of the blade tighter so it won't slip. The wood between Rob's teeth started to crack under the force of his bite. He was fighting the pain. Myrcella to put one hand on his chest so she could make the last cut, blinking away her tears. When the blade finished slicing into his flesh and the entry wound was enlarged and deep enough, Rob was already growling and shouting muffled curses. His body was held still by Gratian, who used both hands to keep him lay flat on the bed. The pain must be excruciating, his face turned ashen, so lifeless that for a second she thought she failed him. Then after the bad blood oozed out, she pressed both sides of the incisions, making a gaping gap right in the arrow's entry point. They could see the tip of the barbed edge from behind a gush of blood. Blackfish helped her pull the barbed arrowhead from Rob's chest using the pincer. It was fortunate the arrowhead did not break when it hit him. Leaving the shaft intact also makes the removal of the arrowhead and shaft as one piece easier for them. Relief sighs were heard in the room once Blackfish successfully extracted the head without breaking it from the shaft. The wood between Rob's teeth broke in two, his muffled shouting stopped as he succumbed to pain and fatigue. A second bowl of clean water was brought to the bedside, which Myrcella used to clean his wound. He was covered in sweat and blood. Pia had found a dress that once seemed to belong to Lady Sarsfield. They tore it to shreds, taking the silk threads which had now been soaked in boiling water to stitch Rob's wound. It was still bleeding slightly when she stitched him up. She carefully pulls the thread to avoid pulling too much to cause skin eversion. The wound was quite long, she made sure two sides of the skin came together to prevent dirt entering the wound. "Will he survive?" Gratian looked troubled. "He will, if the wound did not fester." "But it did not, did it?" "We shall see in the next 2 days, my lord." "You've done well," Blackfish said. Pia came forward with another bowl of boiled water. "It has cooled down a little," with a piece of cloth on the side of the bowl to be used to clean Rob's body. Pia dipped the cloth, squeezed the excess water, and began to cleanse the blood off Rob's chest. "I'll take you to your chamber to rest," Princess Brian offered. "You might want to discard your gown, too." She looked down and saw what Lady Brian meant. Her gown, which was already torn and dirty, was now soiled in Rob's blood. "I will stay with him, if you kindly let me, my lady." Gratian opened his mouth to object, but shut it close once he caught Brian's face. "I don't see why not," Blackfish said from beside her. "As long as you keep him breathing." "What do you need to keep him alive?" Gratian grumbled half-heartedly. "A lot of prayers to start with, my lord. I will need to check what was left in the Maester's chamber, too. I don't know much about healing, but Maester Vimon had been kind enough to teach me a number of things while in Riverrun. There's not a lot left in the Maester's chamber. We can bring it to you here, so you can check whether it would be useful or not," said Blackfish. "My lord, you're very kind. Just keep him alive, will you?" Once the three of them left the chamber, Pia gave her another piece of damp cloth. Do you want to do it, milady? The heat rushed to her cheeks again. Pia reached out to put the cloth in Myrsilla's hand, guiding it over Rob's stomach. The skin was pale, with fine hairs from his chest forming a straight line through a stout stomach, and disappearing under his breeches. Unconsciously, Myrcilla looked away. It was inappropriate to see and touch a man's body who was not her husband. Have you ever seen a naked man? Pia. Myrcilla glared at her friend, who was holding back laughter. He's not naked. Almost naked, Pia corrected, still smiling. Do you want to touch him? I already touched him. Myrcilla hushed her, shooting a horrified glance towards the door. She was afraid their voices would wake Rob. I was the one who stitched him up, wasn't I? Yes, milady, said Pia, giving her a small smile, while continuing to wash Rob's body. Pia, it is inappropriate for me to. Caring for someone is not inappropriate, milady. Pia interjected. Myrcilla bit her lip. She watched Pia clean Rob's body. Soon, the sound of his breathing became regular as he slept. As Blackfish said, there were not many left in the maester's chamber. 3 wooden crates, bottles of dry leaves, and a few scrolls were brought to the Lord's chamber for Myrcilla to see. There weren't many to be used. The most paramount ones were the one Lord Sussfield and his maester brought out of the castle. She tidied what could be used, candles, wax, some dry herbs, and the remaining of silk threads. The sun was setting and Rob was still sleeping when she came out from his chamber. Walton and Pia dutifully stood by the door, waiting for her. The hallway was already lit by torches hanging from the stone wall. Are there any wounded men? There's still a lot of threads left. Plenty of it, Walton scoffed, sounded like he was supposed to be one of them, fighting and wounded valiantly in battle. What do you want to do, milady? Pia asked. If this castle still has any salt left, honey, oh, and maggots. Maggots should be plenty, right? Please gather it. Do you see any willows? Cut the newer bark and boil some water, What's this? Gratian asked. Roose Bolton walked silently behind him, his cold eyes watching her with odd interest. She was never at ease whenever Lord Bolton was present. If any of your men out there needed attention, I can help a little, my lord. Oh, did you? Lord Bolton said, without the slightest interest. What do you need? Gratian asked. You already know there's nothing much here. She told them what could be obtained or sought around the castle: honey, salt, maggots, willows barks, meadowsweet, wild bergamots, more silk dresses to be torn apart. Gratian bellowed orders for the healthy men to start gathering what she needed. Men were dispatched 3 by 3 to look in the forest and nearby hills. Another pair were sent to check around the castle grounds. Soon, copper pans were taken out of the kitchen to boil water. Assignments were distributed among men, and before long she found herself giving instructions on how to process willow's bark for ointment. They mixed wild bergamots into boiling water to relieve fever. Those whose wounds needed to be sutured get the first chance to be treated. Myrcilla asks everyone who comes to deal directly with the wounded to first wash their hands in clean water. She treated those who were hit by arrows from the battle this morning the same treatment she gave to Rob. Some have pulled the arrowhead on their own and cauterized the wound, and within hours showed symptoms of dying tissue. She had to open their wounds again to clean, and put maggots inside before covering it with clean cloth. Nearing midnight, she dragged herself back to the Lord's chamber to check on Rob, who was still asleep when she placed a chair next to his bedside. The chamber was well lit by candles, and from the hearth, she made sure Rob was breathing, that the sutured wound was clean with no signs of inflammation or infection. Blackfish had given her a jar of honey that was almost gone. She spread it thinly over Rob's wound, intending to stretch it as long as she could. Pia came to her with a gun. This time it was not Lady Sussfield's, as it was made of thick spun linen. The color was grey and a bit worn, without ornamentation nor embroidery to complement the wearer's body. The only adjustment was the drawstring brace at the back of her waist. It was the kind of gown a kitchen maid would wear, and she welcomed the clean change happily. Do you want to stay with him? Pia whispered, clutching Myrcilla's old gown in her hand. Yes. Walton and I will be outside, milady. She thankfully sat back on the chair again. The castle felt more quiet, or was it just the sense of tranquility she experienced whenever Rob was near? Her muscles ached, the lack of sleep started to catch up with her. Sweat formed on Rob's forehead, which Myrcella wiped with a damp cloth dipped in cold water. She had never paid much attention to him before, afraid someone would catch her staring. She always knew he was an attractive man, and he was handsome as he slept. She collected herself and looked closer. Rob's arms were veiny, she thought, fighting the desire to caress it. He stirred. His lips moved as if he was saying something she couldn't hear. "I saw you in my dream," he once told her. "Rob, are you dreaming?" she whispered. "Did you see Winterfell?" She tried to picture what he'd dream of, the grey stones of Winterfell, the dense wolfswood running with grey wind. Is she in his dream again, she pondered too, wanting to curl up into the curve of his arm, to smell the intoxicating scent that was like dripping from his pores. Instead, she tucked his arm into the blanket, pulling it to his chin. He sighed in his sleep. The sound of a door closing jerked her awake. She was alone in the chamber, but saw Pia had left a jug of water by the table near the door. She did not know what time it was already, she must have fallen asleep from exhaustion, as did Rob on the bed. A moment of panic engulfed her as she saw him lying there, motionless. She nearly put her head on his chest to find heartbeats when she saw him breathing. The sight of his chest weaving in a steady rhythm made her overwhelmed with relief. In the candlelight she watched Rob sleep. He looked peaceful, the wrinkles on his forehead disappeared, the corners of his lips relaxed while the sound of his steady breathing was like music to her ears. Myrcella slid down Rob's blanket to peek at his wound. There were still no signs of inflammation or infection hours after they retracted the arrowhead, which was good. She looked bashfully at his chest hair. He was kind of hairy, in a good way, a man's body instead of Joffrey's pale hairless one. She was about to tuck him again when she saw his finger twitch in his sleep. "Rob," she slipped her hand into his. She felt the roughness of his fingertips, the calloused skin brushed against hers. His skin felt warmer now under her palm. The bruise where he had been struck by Lord Marbrand Smith had begun to fade, leaving the skin appearing yellowish. He suffered a number of cuts, old and new, and she wondered how far Rob always led the battles at the front. "You must not die," she told him. There was a new scar on his chin, just below the lips, that she just recognized. Thin wisps or facial hair adorned his jaw, but the hair did not grow to cover the fresh scar. His lips slightly parted in his sleep, oblivious to the fact she was watching him. He was asleep for a long time. She stayed by his bedside, listening to his breathing. Perhaps this could be the first and the last time she can look at him freely. The candles had almost burned halfway to the bottom when she, once again, gave into a dreamless sleep. She woke up feeling someone caressing her head. "Is it morning already?" she mumbled sleepily. The hand that was on her head moved away. "Almost dawn, most likely," she heard Rob answered. "I'm so sorry, I fell asleep," she straightened up. Her neck felt stiff. Rob was already sitting on the head of the bed, looking at her. The flames on the candle flickered for a few moments before finally dying out, completely swallowed by its own melt at the bottom of the holders. Moonlight came in from the ledge of the window, shining directly to the side of Rob's bed. She blinked her eyes to adjust to the darkness. They were still alone in the chamber. "It's all right," his voice coarse. "Drink this water," she offered, to which Rob obliged, taking a few sips from the cup she gave him. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Thank you." He sat propped up by pillows. The blanket sagged and he did not make a move to cover his bare chest. When moonlight fell on his body, Myrcella hoped he did not see how red her face must be. "Are you hungry? I will find Pia to fetch some food." No. Rob caught her arm before she could go to the door. The sudden movement made him groan. "Don't move too much. It might tear your sutures. Stay. Please." Rob did not let go of his grip, so she sat back on the chair. He looked down at the bandage covering the sutures, touching the cloth that wrapped his wound. "I'm glad you paid attention to your maestas. Did you think I am not?" He seemed in deep thought. "Well, I didn't, though Maester Lewin whacked the nonsense out of me by reminding me of my duties. Always the dutiful one. My Grand Maester was boring." I could still hear his dull voice in my head. I'd just recall his monotone whenever I can't sleep. But I learned a lot from Maester Vimen. Oh, did you? Rob raised a thick eyebrow, smirking. Guess now I have to build you that small house you want, where you can welcome anyone who seeks shelter and medical aid. I cannot be a healer. She smiled at his remark nonetheless, surprised that he even remembered. Joffrey and Mother won't let me. Of course you can, if you come north with me. She averted her eyes from him, not knowing whether he was serious or not. Maester Vimen taught me about medicinal plantations. His chamber has a lot of it. I could recall the spicy smell. When I was left in Riverrun, he let me help make copies of old scrolls and manuscripts. I've never read nor written that much in my life. Herbs, recipes, tales, histories. Years spent with the Grand Maester, but I learnt a lot in a few moons with Maester Vimen. One of them was about this folklore, and it was about buttercup flowers. She was babbling without realizing it, something she'd do whenever she was nervous. The yellow flower, he said, to her surprise did not sound displeased. Like you. She looked up at him shyly. Yes, the yellow flower. What is it, then? He inquired. Do you really want to hear it? She asked, even more surprised. She always thought Rob wouldn't be entertained by hearing such things. It was children's stories, after all, forgotten in old rotting scrolls. I'd love to. Well, as legend tells us, there was once a coyote who was playing a game of tossing his eyes high into the air and then catching them. She giggled when she saw Rob's eyes widened. One day, a passing eagle saw what he did. The eagle snatched the eyes on one of the tosses, and the poor coyote couldn't see a thing, for it became dark for him without his eyes. So the coyote picked up buttercup flowers and made new eyes from it. That was rather disturbing, Rob concluded. But one smart coyote, I'd do the same if I were him. Good choice of flower. It reminded her of the buttercup petals he tucked in his letter. I'm sorry I lost your poem, the one you wrote to me. I didn't bring it the night they attacked. I will write you another, he promised. You only need to inspire me. She smiled. Now it is time for you to rest again, Your Grace. But I thought I heard you call me by my name. It was not, comma. Or am I dreaming? It sounded real, though. He grinned. It just slipped. Why is it so hard for you to just say it? He looked disappointed. Because you're a king. Because it is inappropriate for me. Because calling your name makes me feel like there's no distance between us. Friends call each other's names in private, don't they, Myrcella? She was ready to argue again, but Rob cuts in. My name. Just say it. Rob, she obliged, for the first time calling his given name in front of him, feeling the heat return to her cheeks. See, it was not that hard, wasn't it? Blue eyes met green eyes, and she couldn't explain the emotion that embraced her like a warm blanket. She must have looked at him with a widened eye, wanting to drown into the invasive feeling, because a moment later his mischievous grin reappeared. His smile was not as fierce as it always was, still exhausted from the pain he felt. Whenever he looked at her with those dreamy looks, she could feel the butterflies inside her stomach flutters. Stop staring, she reminded herself, but failed to do so. You looked like you just saw a ghost, he commented. I spent hours afraid that you might be dead. Fortunately, I didn't. Don't die, she whispered. What? Don't die. Please. Rob looked at her, the naked chest heaved heavily. She wanted to touch his face, to caress the thick eyebrows and touch his firm jaw. There was a hint of storm in Rob's bright blue eyes, she realized, and something about his gaze that she'll never find in another man. I won't, he whispered back hoarsely. His eyes reflected the flame from the hearth. She shivered to feel the drop in the temperature, and regretfully tore herself from his bedside. She felt Rob's eyes glued at her as she fed more wood into the hearth. It did not take long for the chamber to feel warm again. Myrcella sat back in her chair. There's plenty of room here, he gestured to his bed. Myrcella's eyes widened, mortified. No, I mean, Rob hurriedly added, looking sheepish. I want you to stay, but I also don't want you to get sick. That chair looks uncomfortable. And you need sleep. And, Rob cleared his throat. I will not do anything indecent. I just I just don't want you to get sick, that's all. She bit her lip. Remember the pool? Rob asked softly, and he grinned when she blushed instantly at the memory. I will not do anything that will dishonor you in any way. You have my word. When she didn't answer, Rob shifted on the bed. He pulled the pillows behind his back and stacked it in the middle of the bed. Look, he said with a satisfied grin, I built you a castle. A wall, she couldn't contain her giggle, of pillows. Indeed. I just want you to be able to lie down. Reluctantly, Ursula nodded, climbing onto the bed. He was right, Lord Sarsfield's bed was spacious enough to hold both of them comfortably. There is even enough space between them, where the pillows become dividers between their bodies, leaving only a gap for them to be able to look at each other's faces as they lay facing one another. Comfortable? He asked when she settled on her side of the huge bed. Yes. They were silent for a moment, gazing into each other's eyes. She loved to hear him breathing. She studied the side of his face, the shadow of his facial hair made her want to reach out to feel whether it was soft or rough. He closed his eyes, but the side of his lips were drawn to form a smile. His was the face of a grown man now, very different from the one she tried to recall from her time in Winterfell. Rob, were you scared? She broke the silence. In all the battles you've been through, were you afraid when you rode to the battlefield? I'd be lying if I say I'm not, he replied quietly, eyes still closed. I don't even know what made me able to bring thousands of people this far. That they looked at me, listened to my words, fought for me. Fear accompanies me all the time. Then my father died and it just got worse. I am afraid I won't be able to save my sister from King's Landing. That I won't find Arya, and only led my people to destruction for naught. Rob opened up his eyes to give her a sad smile. She wanted to reach out to him, to let him know he was not alone. So many fears, but never the fear of death he contemplated. Until I fell from my horse with an arrow in my chest. She took a sharp inhale at that. I was laying on the ground, gulping for air. He continued, for the first time, I was afraid to die. This is not my time, I remember saying that to myself. I've made promises. There's something I'd like to do. This is not my time to die. And, she asked. He turned to look at her again with a heavy sigh. And I couldn't stop thinking about her. She felt a pang of jealousy at his confession. Why is that? What do you think makes me unable to stop thinking about her? For the first time in her life, she had never felt this hopeless and envious of someone. She is very lucky, she managed to say, biting the pain away. She hoped to be born a free. Is she? Rob asked back softly. He reached out and wiped her cheek. His eyes looked weary. Both sides of his body were covered in bruises and cuts, including the one that was struck by an arrow. Leaning towards her on one side made him short of breath in no time. Rob rolled to lay on his back, sighing. I told you to wear better armor. She found herself snarling at him, rubbing the tears from her eyes. I'm sorry, he replied sheepishly, cringing. Tears were flowing freely now, stubbornly, to her cheek and pooling on the pillow. Thank you for staying, he muttered. Lady Brian told me you could have left with your grandfather's men. Yet you stayed. You're now here, too. She tried to calm her sobs. Thank you for keeping me safe. I will take you home. He must have mistaken her tears as her longing to go home. But where is home? Ursula, he called her again when she didn't reply, lost in thoughts. I don't know, if I want to go. She doesn't know what it makes her, a stupid girl or a traitor to her house. Both, perhaps. Jaime's voice had not been heard for a long time. She had not dreamt of headless nights anymore. Soon you'll see your little brother again. Isn't that what you want? It was, more than anything. What about you? Rob. Rob sighed, can I send Raven? She couldn't help but smile, as long as your queen allows me to reply. Oh, I will make sure of it, Rob grinned. She loves how his lips lifted upward, the dimple in his right cheek deepens. The way his smile brought light to his eyes, a mixture of mischief and sincerity. For the umpteenth time, she could see Rob as a 17-year-old youth, not a king. He was a friend, and not a foe. Rob, in that pool. Why did you tell me that I am perfect? Because you are, said Rob, simply. But I am not. I can't even play the harpsichord. Mother said it was something shameful for women like me. Rob burst out laughing. Oh, finally there is something a princess cannot do, he teased. And you always cry, like a babe. The look on her face must have frightened Rob, because the next thing she saw was he rolled towards her, his face wrinkled to withstand the pain as his stitches were squashed. Are you going to cry again? I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't mean, comma. This time it was Merciless' turn to laugh at him. And you, a king, who's afraid to see women cry? Rob grumbled, but letting out a relief sigh. You're so mean, to let me think you were about to cry again. I don't like seeing you cry. They laughed before falling into an odd comfortable silence again. She suddenly realized he could send her back to her chamber, or she could refuse his offer to climb onto the bed, yet there they were, lying side by side like they were back in that prairie again. What promises have you made? She wanted to ask him. What was that thing you wanted to do? If we survive this war, will we ever meet again? I'm glad we're friends, Rob. It was still dark as night, but Rob was right, dawn was approaching. She had slept under the sky for so long that by the feel of moisture and the drop of temperature, she could feel it had soon daybreak. Pierre and Walton soon will come to take her to her chamber. Rob's lieutenants and lords soon will be flocking around him, counseling. The closeness between them will soon be over. I'm glad you knew how to patch up a man, and that you listened to Maester Vimen, he said after a while, smirking. And that you don't hate me, or else I won't be here being treated by you. It's because I've liked you for a while now, she teased. Rob chuckled. Well, isn't it a relief to know? I tried not to fall in love with you, she said to herself as she watched him laugh. I really did. The end.